Okay, hello everyone, and we apologize sincerely for the technical difficulties. Thank you for hanging in there and waiting for us, but looks like we're up and running. So thank you for joining us for our July live YouTube. Today, I will be asking our technical director, Dr. Shuvo Roy, as many questions as I can that were submitted by you on the registration forms and in the chat. So we're going to try to get through as many questions as possible. Just be aware that the answers might be a little bit abbreviated. We're going to try to cover things in about 1 or 2 minute answers. And if you're curious for more details, we encourage you to review our previous YouTube lives and other material on YouTube. We'll get started by Shuvo will give a quick update on how the project's going and review what the bioartificial kidney is all about for people that might be new to our project. So I'll turn it over to Shuvo now. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. It's a pleasure to be doing this again with the community and give you an update on where we are. I realize from my emails there's quite a number of new people listening. So I thought I would start by recapping our overall vision and some of the progress. So let me start by sharing the video that some of you have seen, others may not have, and then we can use that to launch into our update and Q&A. So bear with me a second. And we're going to put the sound on. And here you go.
People living with kidney failure can look forward to a future without dialysis or an endless wait for a transplant organ. Combining continuous treatment with total mobility, the implantable bioartificial kidney will give patients back their health, freedom, and quality of life. The compact device will replicate many functions of healthy kidneys and will not require immunosuppression drugs. The bioartificial kidney combines a mechanical hemofilter to remove toxins from blood and a bioreactor containing engineered renal tubule cells to maintain water volume, electrolyte balance, and metabolic functions. Highly efficient membranes constructed from semiconductor silicon wafers enable filtration without requiring pumps or electrical power, while protecting the renal cells from rejection by the patient's immune system. The biocompatible device attaches to the circulatory system and removes toxins to the bladder as waste. After a decade of engineering development to refine the hemofilter and bioreactor components, preclinical prototypes of the implantable bioartificial kidney have been successfully created. Cleanroom microfabrication processes have been established to reliably produce high-quality silicon membranes. Tissue culture protocols have also been optimized to reproducibly grow renal tubule cells and maintain their function. The silicon membranes were mounted in polycarbonate housing to construct hemofilters, and in similar fashion, bioreactors were assembled to immunoprotect the renal tubule cells. The hemofilter and bioreactor components were then connected to create bioartificial kidney prototypes for benchtop and preclinical testing. In proof of concept experiments, the hemofilter operated under blood pressure alone, without systemic anticoagulation, while the renal cells in the bioreactor remained alive and healthy without immunosuppression. Further improvements will scale up the prototypes with additional silicon membranes and renal cells, creating clinical devices that can demonstrate sustained treatment of kidney failure in human trials. The implantable bioartificial kidney will provide the therapy and mobility patients need to move beyond the burdens of dialysis and organ shortage, and once again enjoy the freedoms of everyday life.
Okay, so thank you for your attention. So this snippet shows the progress of the implantable bioartificial kidney from concept almost 2 decades ago to work that was done as late as last year. So as we ended on that video, you saw that what we said was we'll have to scale up the device to incorporate more membranes and more cells, and then demonstrate the effectiveness of the device to treat kidney failure. So what we've been doing over the last year is looking at the challenges that have to be addressed for scaling. What does that mean? We have to design membranes that would have more efficiency, cells that can be packed and stay reliably, and then at the same time, look at coatings that allow the fluids in the cells to survive. So more recently, in the past few months, our focus has been improving these three components on the multi-pronged approach. And one of the areas we've focused on is what do we need to do to make the membranes have sufficient filtration capacity, but sufficiently small enough to fit into the device that's about the size you saw on the video. So that requires more work on the CAD design, and to that extent, taking advantage of new semiconductor technologies to improve. And I'm pleased to say we've made progress. We have been able to increase the porosity of the membranes by packing in more filter units, if you will. At the same time, show that we're not making the membranes too fragile. You might imagine that if you make something with too many holes, you make it more fragile, but that's the engineering optimization we take on. And this work has to be done meticulously and systematically, and then tested first on the computer, then on the benchtop before we go to more animal studies. And on the cellular side, we're working with my colleagues, Dr. Fizel and others, to improve the stability of the cells. So now we have cells that are stable for over 6 to 8 months outside of the natural biological environment. So that, to me, is an important step in that direction. And you'll hear more about these scientific advancements in the coming months as we present this work at conferences and peer-reviewed papers. So let me stop there, and then we'll move to the topic of today, which is, the Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Roy. So kind of building off what you just told us, how would you describe what stage the project is in now? And can you also help set people's expectations on the timeline moving forward and when patients might expect to be able to be treated by this device?
It's a great question. So when you think about ambitious projects, we can think of analogies in industry. When I talk about industry, I'm talking about maybe let's take another sort of first of a kind, going to space. Or you can look at new technologies for computation and see if there are parallels you can draw from and how do you stage them. So you can stage them from a vision, a concept, first stage prototype, benchtop testing, proof of concept, preclinical feasibility, clinical studies. That's sort of the range of spectrum we might think about our work. So if I look at what I showed you in the video, where are we? We are at the principle of proof of concept of a functioning implantable bioartificial kidney. What does that mean? It means that we've been able to show the concept and the vision we'd started with, which was, can we bring together filtration with cell therapy and show that you actually can create urine? And the answer is yes, we can. Now, why do I call it proof of a concept? It's because we're showing that we can do that, but there's still work to be done to provide enough filtration, enough urine output to treat kidney disease in a substantive way. So this will require additional work. And to do that, we'll have to make the improvements that I relayed in the last few minutes about scaling up and optimization. Let me stop there. I may have missed some of that question. Remind me if I missed something there.
Yeah, it was a two-part question, but that was the first part. And the second part was what's the timeline now for when trials could start and when patients could start to receive the implant?
Sure. Another great question. And I'll say that there's the schedule of, what I would like to see happen and what really might happen. So again, the way I always like to preface this answer is there's the work that we can lay out on a project timeline and say, if we do this work, how long will it take and what's the timeline for that? And fundamentally, that's a 3 to 4 year timeline. Now, why is it 3 to 4 years? Because if you say here, the tasks that must be done, given the amount of time it takes, some of it is design, simulation, testing, review of the data, okay? And there's a element of iteration. Sometimes you have to go and redo this to improve, just fundamental engineering strategies of how you develop products. That is a 3 to 4 years. And why is it 3 to 4 years? Because sometimes there'll be additional iterations. So I don't want to say it's 3 years, and I can just know from experience it could be more, but not that much more. But there's a fundamental assumption underneath that. There's no complete surprises, and we don't think there might be, but again, never say never. Second, you're resourced appropriately so that you can move the work forward. And I want to say that has probably been an issue with us. But if that was not an issue, they're looking for a 3 to 4 year time frame. That is get to the first human testing. Some of you may be asking, what does it take to go from there to making it available worldwide or in the United States, Europe, wherever, Asia? That requires an element of business participation that is going to be required. And that's not necessarily in our hands at this stage. It will require manufacturing partners, will require people who understand the business of distribution and sales. So that will depend on who those partners are. It will depend also on the business climate and the business pool there is. I'm confident because of the immense clinical need and the scientific and engineering breakthroughs that will be there at that point. But I think our focus right now is to get to the first in human studies. And from that, we feel we can springboard to the next level.
Great. Thank you for that update. What would you say is the biggest challenge that the development is facing right now in terms of progressing?
So I'll break this up in terms of technical challenges, because I think that may be illustrative to the community as to what we have to solve. And so we have a proof of concept device. To get to a preclinical feasibility, which means we're testing this in animals and showing that it can treat kidney failure, we need to pack in more membranes and pack in more kidney cells. So you could say, well, let's just build more membranes and let's get more cells. So to get more membranes, we'll have to increase the throughput of membrane production. When you increase the throughput of membrane production, you will have to move from the facilities we're using now, which are research facilities in universities, to commercial foundries that are very familiar with scale up. So factories that make lots of units at a time, but not only that, but they do so reliably. So you have to transfer that process from the university research lab to a manufacturing partner for the membranes. So as you do that, and you're going to increase the volume, you have to find the right partner. And some of you may have heard regular through news, there's a chip shortage in the world. We're not making enough cars because there's a shortage of chips, because those facilities that make semiconductors are limited in their throughput. So one of our challenges is finding a partner like that will take on what we want to do in a way that's economically viable for them. So that's the membrane side. On the cell side, we also have to get more cells. And the cells we have used primarily for our proof of concept studies have been either animal cells or human kidney cells from cadaver kidneys. Well, you have to be able to increase the number of cells. So that requires finding a viable number of human cadaver kidneys from which you can isolate the cells, and not so much in the context of a university research lab, but using automation. Again, finding the partner or finding the tools to do that requires finding the right groups. And many of the groups that traditionally did this have focused on treatments that are not necessarily for kidney, but looking at diseases like COVID or cancer therapy. So we have to find partners like that. So on the technical side is finding the tools to scale up. Associated with that is finding them in a way that's amenable to us, meaning they can work with us and see the timeline that we have. So I'm confident that at some point when we get those, the project will move faster and get past these immediate challenges.
Great, thank you. And other people were asking about if in the chat, is funding a limiting factor for us?
So let me repeat the question. Is funding a limiting factor for us? Some of you who have heard our YouTube live and have read the materials we send out, that is certainly an easy answer, which is yes, it has been the biggest limiting factor in the recent past. When we started out years ago, when the vision and the concept, funding was a limitation, but just doing the science and the engineering required effort. And we're throttled by the pace of work we could get done. We are fortunate enough to get grants, and we're able to get to the work we've achieved today, which is a preclinical proof of concept. Now, we know what has to be done. We know the steps that will need to be taken. But what is throttling us to be slower is the lack of funding to move the project at the pace that it should. So in a way, we're being limited by how much money is trickling in. And if that grew to more than a trickle, the project would move faster. And at a certain point, it's going to be limited by the work. So when I said before the 3 to 4 years, that assumes no limitation on the funding. But we are hopeful that through this raising awareness by our group, by the people in the community, we'll be able to address the funding challenges and get to a point where the throttle is the pace of the development and not the funding available.
Great, thank you for explaining that. Let's move to a question about iHemo. So there have been a couple questions about what is the difference between iHemo and the artificial kidney, and do they have different timelines?
Sure. So for those of you who are not familiar with iHemo, it's on one of our websites and videos. iHemo is basically a home hemodialysis product concept, whereas the implantable artificial kidney, as the name implies, it provides more of a kidney therapy. So what do I mean by home hemodialysis? So many of you are familiar with dialysis. There is a body of literature out there, published scientific literature that says if you can do dialysis more frequently for longer sessions, often in the context of your home, you're able to provide improved patient health, improved quality of life, and even lower costs. And this is not just for iHemo, this is for generally home hemodialysis. And great work has been done in Canada, in the United States, Europe, Australia, to show that this actually holds out. However, home hemodialysis really hasn't taken off, in part because the challenges of the machines, sticking needles, fears of blood disconnect, have made it very scary for many patients to adopt it. So what we have come up with is take our filter for the artificial kidney, which is a great filter, for removing toxins, and use it as a dialyzer cartridge. But because it's efficient and biologically compatible and compact, we propose that let's put it inside and attach it to blood vessels and have a dialysis catheters come out on the outside through the abdomen. And this will allow you to do dialysis without needles, allow you to do dialysis without having to worry about blood coming out of the body. And you could do it at home for much longer times and more frequently than you would do with standard in-clinic dialysis regimens. By doing this, you're making home hemodialysis more user-friendly, and that is enabled by the filtration technology we have developed for the artificial kidney. What iHemo is not, it doesn't provide all the other functions. You still have to be connected to a machine, but preferably not in the clinic. This is at home. You can do dialysis for longer and get those benefits. So in the overall concept, iHemo is a product concept for dialysis, while our implantable artificial kidney is akin to closer to being a kidney transplant.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful. And now this is a more kind of technical device question. How does the bioartificial kidney obtain a supply of oxygen, or does it need to?
So the question is, we have cells in our device. They have to survive. How does it get oxygen? And presumably not only oxygen, but how does it get the nutrients to, like glucose, that allow the cells to survive and do their function? Well, the artificial kidney is connected between the arterial vessel and the venous vessel. And the pressure difference removes toxins from blood. But the size of the pores are designed that you not only remove the toxins like urea, but you also remove, with that, a lot of water, plasma. And this contains, or ultrafiltrate, this contains basically dissolved oxygen. It also contains dissolved solutes like glucose and other small proteins that cells need, other salts that cells need. So that ultrafiltrate that is being generated from blood, which is being directed into the hemofilter unit of the artificial kidney, contains arterial levels of oxygen and nutrients like glucose and other small salts. This watery ultrafiltrate that's laden with nutrients and oxygen is directed from the hemofilter to the bioreactor, which is where the cells are housed. The cells draw the nutrients from this watery ultrafiltrate and use it to gain the energy to perform their intended function. So the metabolism of the cells is fueled by the ultrafiltrate. So you do not need an exogenous source of oxygen, because the ultrafiltrate that's being generated already has the oxygen and other nutrients.
So interesting, thank you. And staying on the kind of technical train, there's another question in the chat about how do you prevent the membranes from clogging up? And would you maybe need to use something like reverse osmosis for that?
So membrane clogging, membrane fouling is a very important challenge for anything that's going to be a filter, and for something that's going to be as permanent as the implantable artificial kidney, it's even more of a challenge. We recognized this early on, and this is one of our key questions we had to address before we felt that the whole work could move forward. So we looked to, among others, is how is membrane fouling, or just fouling of biological surfaces prevented, or materials prevented? So for example, people have heart valves, people know that, people have coronary stents. So there's a lot of science that has been done to understand how to prevent clogging or materials from depositing, and blocking of blood vessels. So we've taken inspiration from that work. We have basically looked at what is the fouling cascade. You have proteins that are in blood that deposit on the membrane, attach, and then attract more proteins. That's how membrane clogging or fouling happens. Well, how do you retard that process? One is you try to prevent things from attaching to the surface, and looking at industrial processes for water filtration, but also those medical devices like heart valves and coronary stents. There's work that has been done where you can coat these filters or materials to prevent attachment. So we've been inspired by that work. But one important thing to note is that while there's a lot of chemistries available to prevent deposition and attachment, many of these films or molecules that prevent that, so you coat it with a certain material and that repels proteins away from the surface, they tend to be very thick. So what we had to work on was coming up with techniques so we could coat our materials with these anti-fouling coatings, but in such a way that we don't block off the actual little pores in the membrane. And suffice to say, we are successful years ago, and that's one of the reasons we're now able to move the project to the stage as it is today, because we bring these biologically friendly coatings, deposit them in very thin layers, molecularly thin layers, and that prevents the clogging of the pores in the membrane.
That's great to know. Thank you. A couple other people are asking in the chat about some cell sourcing questions, and particularly whether patients could maybe donate their cells, or if you could get them from transplant patients or dialysis patients, or if there's anything people can do to help with that issue. There might not be, but.
Yeah, so it's a great question. Like, how can we source the cells? So let me look back and refer to you the work we've done so far, which is we've used human cells in our testing, and those human cells have come from cadaver kidneys that could not be used for transplant. We've also looked at animal cells and used them in our device. And when you look forward, are those viable sources? Both of them have risks associated with them. Human cadaver kidney cells, one, there's not just enough kidneys available, so you're gonna have to find a source for those. So long term, it may not be the source that will suffice for the millions of people who need an artificial kidney. Animal cells are attractive, but as many of you know, the challenge is xenotransplant. Xenotransplant being using animal cells, and while much work has been done in trying to reduce the immune rejection and the reactivity of the cells, there's still a risk. So can we use people donating the cells? The answer is yes, but it has to go through a qualification process. And sometimes the effort to get that, right now for our research purposes, we have enough cadaver human cells for use. For longer term, I think it's going to require probably a stable source of cells that we can scale up, and that may be in the stem cell arena. So as kidney stem cell technology matures and it's optimized to provide more natural like kidney cell functions, I feel like that will give us a stable source. And it is still, that field of kidney stem cells is nascent. So what can you guys do in the community? One is encourage whoever does research to take on kidney stem cell work. I mean, there are a lot of stem cell efforts around the world. So encourage them to say, hey, look, let's focus on kidney stem cells and not just orthopedic or cardiac or other types of cells. The other thing to do in terms of if you know people who are donating kidneys or the cadaver or their own, is offer those to companies that have perfected isolation and expansion of the cells and we obtain those human kidney cells from them. So those are two ways you might be able to help.
Great, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go back to the funding topic. A few people are wondering what has been done in terms of seeking out government funding for this project. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Sure. So we have to date mostly obtained government funding through grants, and grants from the National Institutes of Health were the primary driver for a lot of the work we've done. And then more recently, we are fortunate to win some prizes from Kidney X, which is a public-private partnership between the American Society of Nephrology and the Department of Health and Human Services in the United States. So that's where much of the funding has come from. And the challenges are that we need more funding than has been traditionally available, because the amount of funding for what we need to be done is not so much basic research funding from NIH. It's more of this translational scale-up funding that traditionally comes from industry, but industry is not yet ready to step up. At least we hope they will, but they haven't yet, and they may do so. And initiatives like Kidney X required multiple stakeholders to come and support it, which is moving forward, but maybe not moving fast enough. So we are hoping that by combination of Kidney X and corporate partners and the basic science institutes at NIH, there will be sufficient money to move us forward. But it's really going to require probably additional funding that will require the community again to raise awareness of why this is so important. Because we are obviously, when we go for government funding, we are competing with not only people in the kidney space, but cancer, heart, liver, etc. So keep up the advocacy, keep up the push on the government, because in many ways, once they decide they can support this and want to support it with higher amounts of funds and provide those funds to the community, folks like us can then apply for grants and accelerate the project.
Great, thank you. And people are curious also about kind of what level of funding we would need in order to get to those first clinical trials.
Sure. Yeah, we've actually thought about that quite a bit. And the number, I have mentioned this before, is approximately 10 million. Now, plus or minus 1 million, if you know, again, there's some assumptions built into it. And that 10 million will let us scale up the membrane technology, procure the cells and scale them up, test them on the benchtop and in animal studies, integrate the filter and the cell therapy units, and then get ready for the first in human tests. And if everything goes well, the money is there, that's a 3 to 4 year time frame. Now, one anecdote I'll share is that we have had a development plan for the artificial kidney pretty much since we started, and we look at it frequently, and every so often we look at it very closely, and we realize that we make changes based on, you know, technologies that have come about or things that haven't gone the way, but fundamentally we are still following the same roadmap. In that roadmap, one of the key milestones was to create urine through a combination of the filter unit and the cell therapy unit, which is what we showed in the video and achieved in 2021. We achieved it in 2021, but in our roadmap, if everything had gone according to plan, we should have achieved that 7 years ago. So that gives you a sense that our work has been limited by the available resources and not so much the technical work that has to be done and the time it takes.
Mm-hmm. And what about possible resources on the philanthropy side, like going to the Gates Foundation or another wealthy individual? Has that been tried?
Yes, so we have tried that to some extent, and we've gotten some philanthropy from wealthy individuals, but unfortunately not the types of levels of money we need. We've gotten from many people in the community, a few tens of dollars to hundreds of dollars, even maybe a few tens of thousands and 100,000 or so. But by and far, most of our philanthropists have given money in small amounts. We've gone to the large philanthropists, and many of them have priorities, and they have focus areas. And right now, supporting the kind of work we do has not gotten them interested, at least to advance their money towards us. Now, it may be a lack of awareness. We've tried to explain to them, hey, there's not other monies, this is challenge, here's the progress. And whether it's the foundations you've mentioned and other wealthy people, and I know some of you in the community have written letters, not only in this country, but all over the world. But frankly, we have not seen the response. That's not to say you should give up. I think that to hear, and sometimes it's hearing over and over again, and it's going to require more than just me asking, because when I go and ask, there's almost the expectation that, hey, you're going to ask for money because it's your project. But when you guys go ask, we're amplifying our voice. So yes, we have asked those folks, we've asked other rich folks. I think the largest grant or the gift we've ever gotten was close to $1 million years ago. We haven't got anything like that since. And the expectation from that particular donor was that if they gave us $1 million, others would step up. And gosh, through our groups, through our universities, through our friends, we've gone on the pavement, but we've never been successfully able to convert that. Some of you may be better at asking for that kind of money, and maybe I'm not. And frankly, when I go do that, I do take time away from the work that's important to move the project forward. So I would urge all of you guys to do what you can. And yes, we've tried that. We should continue trying it. And I figure if enough of us try it, statistically, the chances are higher to get that kind of money.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to move into more of a eligibility question now. So one person on the registration form asked if they have an opportunity to get a transplant kidney now, should they do that in the hopes that the artificial kidney might be available later on, at the point where their kidney could, excuse me, I think they're thinking that their transplant might not last forever. Should they go ahead and get it? And would that make them ineligible to receive an artificial kidney once it's available?
Sure. So if the question is, if there's availability of a transplant kidney today, and should they get it today or next year versus waiting for artificial kidney, I think I would be saying, get it. Get the transplant kidney. If it's available, it's going to give you a level of quality of life and health that simply existing modalities like dialysis will not. Now, if you get a transplant kidney and the transplant doesn't last and our artificial kidney is available, could you be eligible? I think it will depend specifically on the individual's assessment, but but there's no reason to say just because they've had a transplant, they should be ineligible. That would not be the issue. So very much, we all know that transplants are not necessarily permanent. They can sometimes last a decade, if a little longer, but they're not permanent, and they require immunosuppression. The implantable artificial kidney does not require immunosuppression. It may require its own maintenance, but if you get a transplant, there's no reason to think you should become automatically ineligible for the implantable artificial kidney.
Okay, that's great to know. And we have another question about how long the device might last. Is it something that would have to be replaced every year or every month? How
yeah. So I want to maybe draw a distinction between the Vision, which is a permanent implantable bioartificial kidney, and the stages that it might take to get there. So to start off with, I think we identified what are the burdens that we should try to address. Connection to a dialysis machine. The ability to travel is something or the inability to travel is something we'd want to address. The restrictions on drink and food we'd want to address. So we figured those were some of the more immediate burdens we should address. And to do that, we do not have to have 100% kidney replacement. Some of you who are familiar with dialysis know that dialysis replaces 10, 15% of a native kidney function. And there are many patients out there who can live a normal quality of life with 20, 30% of normal kidney function. So in the development stages, or stages of development, I would see as the first scenario of an implantable artificial kidney as getting you the 20 to 30%. Because if you do that, yes, maybe you have to take some medications, maybe you have to modify your lifestyle a little bit, but you can travel, you can take the restrictions in diet away, and overall gain better health and lower costs. So that would be the first stage. And then you go downstream as cells improve, as we make more sophisticated technology in terms of membranes and cells, would make the device more and more efficient. And that would allow us to then think about a way, like, what would it take for you to have a more normal life? And that would be, and we'll eventually achieve a vision like that. But I would not want, my colleague has mentioned this, we do not want the perfect to become the enemy of the good. So the goal is, let us, in the short term, in the context of our work, focus on providing mobility, removing restrictions on diet to a large extent that dialysis imposes, and the ability to travel and not have to worry about not being able to hold down employment.
That sounds great. Thanks. There's another question about how much we know about how much the artificial kidney will eventually cost, and how much the surgery would cost. And do we expect that to be covered by insurance?
Yeah. Again, great questions. So we can look to other devices. First of all, the cost of what it is sold to the patient and what it costs to build, as some of you know in healthcare, have very little relationship. So it may cost a little bit. They sell it for a lot of money. The EpiPen, which was scandalous a few years ago, is an example. Somebody jacked up the price from a few tens of dollars to over almost $1,000. So what it costs is not so much me and the kidney project controlling, it's what the business model is going to drive and what the insurances will pay. All right. So do we expect insurance to pay? Do we expect the device to cost? Our vision, from what we know in terms of the cost of goods that it would take to make it at scale, is that it should be very much like what it takes to build implanted devices like pacemakers, heart valves, and the like, but a little more because it's more sophisticated. But what it will be sold to the patients and to the hospitals is something we cannot predict, but would imagine, because of it offers cost savings, the insurance companies would want to take this on and negotiate a price that's fair. So I would expect it to, again, giving a roundabout answer, yes, insurance should cover it. And because it should be cost effective, we think insurance will find it attractive to cover it.
Great, thank you. What can people do that are following this project who want to help in terms of raise awareness or write to people that might be in a position to influence change? Who should they write to, and what else can they do?
So great question. And thank you to all of those people out there who are asking that question, because I think it's really important. So one is, if you're in the United States, write to your congressman, write to your legislators, write to your governors, write to all the people that have influence on healthcare policy, and say kidney disease has to be addressed and there's to be more attention. And obviously you can mention our work and say that the challenges we have in terms of funding. That will help. Internationally, folks can also look to their countries to see if they can partner with us on the kidney project. The governments, many of the governments also have to take care of kidney patients. So by supporting us, they may actually even reduce their costs on their side. So one is right to people in positions of power on the government side. Second, right to those people that you guys know are wealthy and do give money away, and emphasize to them why money is needed for this work, and that it's not just Shuvo Roy, the Kidney Project, Elizabeth Grass, Dr. William Fizel asking for this money, but you guys are asking for the money because we've made preclinical proof of concept and we need a bolus to move forward. So I think you guys reaching out and writing letters in a passionate, clear way to these people that are wealthy, foundations that give out money, often the first letter may not go anywhere, but once they get enough, I think they would be willing to listen. So write those letters. Third, if many of you work with manufacturing partners or companies that know it, if there's an opportunity to partner with us in scaling up, fantastic. But the other thing I would say is many of you guys in this country and other countries work with groups that help raise money for causes. Okay, raise money. Get together and say, okay, let's raise money together and increase the message. So, and then to write about your experiences as to what implantable bioartificial kidney would mean to you. So I think it requires more people to talk about it, express their enthusiasm and excitement for it, and that will couple with our efforts, and we'll together move it forward to a point where it will attract the funding that's needed.
Thank you. That's great information. Can you talk a little bit about where we are in terms of interacting with the FDA? Have discussions already begun? And is there a possibility of obtaining something like an emergency use authorization to get going even faster?
So as some of you guys know in the community, we've had a great partnership with the FDA, and we worked with them early on to roadmap the key milestones we have to meet to get to the first patients and then also beyond. And we have had multiple discussions with them, and they've given us a clarity so we know what those milestones are. And they have been open to working with us to figure out how to do things in a more cost-efficient way. And the plan we have, which I said $10 million, is actually takes into account their input. And so I'm very excited that those discussions have provided us a clarity to what I think is a viable roadmap. In terms of engagement, we are considered to be part of the Breakthrough Device Program, which is one of the fast track programs at the FDA. So I think I feel like that allows us even more engagement with them. In terms of emergency use authorization, I really can't comment on that, but in general, because it doesn't necessarily, what it does is says, hey, we'll approve this faster. But the point is we have to have something to approve or authorize. Maybe I think that's the term, emergency use authorization. So we have to have something to authorize. And that is what we need to authorize is a device, but we don't have the completed device yet. So if we had the implantable bioartificial kidney and FDA was being the bottleneck, I can see ways to engage them and move things faster and talk with them about moving it faster. But it's really not so much that they're the ones holding it up, is we got to have the device developed so that they can, review it. So my point to all of you guys is that, yes, be supportive of the FDA, express your enthusiasm that they're supporting us. But really where we need to focus the attention of the community is that we need to build the implantable bioartificial kidney so that we can take it to the FDA. So the focus has to be on the development part of the project.
Yeah, that's really important. Okay, this question is a little bit of a detailed technical question. They ask that they say that the bioartificial kidney is frequently presented as a passive device, relying on the body's own blood pressure as its energy supply. But is energy required for tasks other than pumping, such as metabolic tasks? Mm-hmm. And if so, how does the kidney get that energy?
Sure. So where do you get what is required? You need oxygen and glucose primarily for that activity of the kidney cells, of any cell, but those are two key. I'm generalizing here, but you need oxygen and you need fuel, and the fuel being glucose or whatever it is, right? So we actually provide that because the passive filtration device, the passive filtration that's happens because of the pressure difference between the artery and the vein generates ultrafiltrate. The ultrafiltrate is laden with dissolved nutrients, including glucose, salts, and it's got dissolved oxygen in it. So that provides the materials that will keep the cells functional. Now, going back, the cells provide a number of different functions and different types of cells. But again, our staged approach, we focused on providing mobility and no connections to the outside. And I've said the key function for the first stage of the device would be to provide enough function so that the patient doesn't need to be tethered and doesn't have fluid restrictions. And so by focusing on one type of cell, the kidney proximal tubule cell, we believe we can achieve that. As we refine the technology and moves forward, we'll bring in other types of cells, and those will provide additional metabolic functions. And again, they'll be fueled and powered by the ultrafiltrate, which has dissolved oxygen and nutrients in it.
Great to know. Thank you. There's a question about female patients and whether they might be able to get pregnant and deliver after receiving an artificial kidney.
Right. So I'll give my answer from the perspective of somebody who works with clinical folks that are on our team, because I'm not the clinician here. But we do know that if you can remove toxins from blood, and this has been done in the case of patients that have done lots of dialysis. So in fact, patients who get a lot of dialysis done, meaning every day for long periods of time, those patients, especially if they're women of childbearing age, can get pregnant. So there's no reason to think that by providing something that's continuous filtration like we do would not achieve the same outcome. So in short, yes, the function of the bioartificial kidney as continuous operation, removing toxins, mimics in even a better way what is tried out clinically today. So patients who want to get pregnant who are on dialysis, they would recommend that they get more frequent dialysis, often at home, and they do become capable of becoming pregnant. So I think that analogy would also apply here.
That's wonderful. Another clinical question, what do you envision might be the age range that people would be eligible for the artificial kidney? Will kids be able to get it? Will elderly patients be able to get it?
So the eligibility is going to be determined to some extent by the patient's condition. And what I mean by that is to put in an implantable artificial kidney, you have to implant it. You have to do surgery. And not every dialysis patient is necessarily capable of withstanding general surgery. So an analogy would be if the patient is capable of going for transplant surgery, they should, in general, be healthy enough for surgery that will put the implantable artificial kidney. So I think that's one way to think about, what's the age range. So there's some very elderly people that get transplant, and there's some younger people that can get a transplant because of their health. So I think instead of saying what's the age range, especially if you look 21 plus, I think it's really about, are they healthy enough? And maybe one way to think about is, are they healthy enough for a kidney transplant? If so, they're more likely to be healthy enough for an implantable artificial kidney. The question about would kids be able to get it, and I'm talking kids in the context of pediatrics, we should remember that the device itself should be able to provide enough function to keep an adult and even a kid alive, but children are vulnerable population. So while technologically it may be possible to use it on a child, I think just the regulatory approach we have in this country would require that we first show sufficient safety so we do not expose children to unnecessary dangers. So I think in terms of the path to patients, children may come later. Again, I'm speculating because we want to not put them at undue risk without first testing it on adults. And then obviously, once there's some body of data, it could go to that patient population.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's a question about xenotransplantation and what is farther along, the xenotransplants or our artificial kidney?
So I think we should look at what we mean by further along. So xenotransplants have been tried on people recently, as many of you in this community know. It was tried out in a patient in Alabama, in New York. They're both brain dead patients, but it was tested on a human being. In one case as an implanted device, in one, I should say implanted device, implanted organ. Another case is an external but attached to the blood vessels. And in both cases, they work for some time, not days, not many days, maybe a few days. So if we were to use that as the metric, clearly they're further along. We should also remember that xenotransplant has a history that goes back probably another 15 years from our conceptualization. So if you look at the work that has been done in New York and Alabama, it was using pig kidneys in humans. And if you look at that, this history of the technology development for xenotransplant, that goes back all the way to Dolly the sheep. Some of you may not know what that means, but some of you may. Dolly the sheep was the first genetically modified large animal, and that came about in the early 90s. So it has taken them almost 30 years to get to the point where they are. And not to say that ours is going to take 30 years, but we're learning from that. But again, there's still work to be done. So in some ways, they're further ahead because they've attached it to a patient. On the other hand, anything that's xenotransplant does require a level of scrutiny for safety because of foreign cells. In our case, our foreign cells are encapsulated in our device and do not necessarily directly react or interact with the patient. So in some ways, we can say we're avoiding the problem altogether. Now, if we go back to my earlier anecdote that, hey, we had a roadmap and we should have achieved what we achieved last year in 2014, by now we'd already been in humans. We can speculate, of course, and we haven't achieved that. So in some case, maybe we are ahead in the overall timeline relative, but there's still work to be done.
Okay, thanks. This question might have been partially covered in the earlier question about iHemo, but there's a new question in the chat about what is the current status of iHemo in terms of its development and getting to patients.
Yeah, so the way we're approaching it is we are focused on the implantable artificial kidney. That's our focus of the kidney project. The iHemo is a side project, is an offshoot. And what we're trying to do with the iHemo is to find investors who are interested in home hemodialysis to help advance that. So as I've said, home hemodialysis done more frequently and for prolonged sessions can restore a significant amount of health, as we know from some clinical studies that have been done. We also know that it's very hard for patients to adopt home hemodialysis because of the complexity of the machine, the safety risks around blood disconnect, and then also just the fear of using sticking needles into blood vessels. So by avoiding those, we think we can make home hemodialysis more user-friendly and hopefully allow the patients to benefit from those therapies. However, it's still dialysis. It will still require a connection to an external unit, but it will make it easier than the current dialysis machines that are out there. So to that extent, what we're hoping with iHemo is not to make that the kidney project. The kidney project is only has a goal of an implantable bioartificial kidney. That's our passion. That's what we are focused on. And with iHemo, we are hoping that we can find a commercial partner, a dialysis company, for example, or somebody that wants to do dialysis in a different way, to come and help commercialize that technology and take it into a business and move it forward. That's our goal, and we're obviously looking for partners that can help do that. But the team, Dr. Fizel, myself, and our team is focused on making sure we get to an implantable artificial kidney that negates the need for dialysis.
That's great to know. Thank you. We've almost been at this for an hour, so I think we'll wrap up really soon. But one last question is, why do you think that in the US, kidney disease maybe hasn't received as much attention as some of the other big diseases?
So it's a great question, and we've always realized that kidney disease has not gotten the attention say cancer has, Alzheimer's has, heart disease has, diabetes has. I can think of a few reasons, but one is that for a long time, the general awareness of the public was low because what they knew about kidney failure was if you had kidney failure, you got a transplant. And if you're not lucky enough to get a transplant, you're on dialysis. And the way dialysis has been put forth is that it's a viable alternative. It's an alternative. It may even keep a patient alive, but doesn't restore health. So I think viable is a potentially misleading word there. So the average person on the street thinks that they're on dialysis, they're going to be fine. And we know from experience and from the cost effectiveness and the health outcomes of these patients, it's not true. Most dialysis patients have a lower survival rate than cancer patients. Second, the innovations around kidney disease have not moved forth because much of the attention has been focused on other killers. Cancer is no longer the killer as it was 20 years ago. Heart disease has come down. So one could argue that one of the reasons there's not more attention was because the priority was on other disease areas that affected more people. And kidney failure affects a very small segment of the population, but costs a lot. The other reason I think is because the people that have kidney disease or affected by kidney disease, for the most part, were not vocal in advocacy or demanded more. And the feeling was, if I have kidney disease or kidney failure, I'll go on dialysis, and nobody's really going to change that because there's nothing possible out there. And we know that's not necessarily true, but I don't think for a long time patients and patient groups and their families were activated like they are now. So that's changing. So I feel like then it's also changing because finally, with patient advocacy, we've got initiatives that led to an executive order saying we should prioritize the treatment of kidney patients. So there's attention at the top levels of government. And we need to keep up that kind of attention. But we also, because we have addressed many of the challenges, say, with cancer and heart disease, I think there's growing attention on kidney disease. And these patients are costing more and not doing well.
Great. Well, thank you for that perspective. I think that's a good spot to leave it for this month. So thank you all so much for tuning in. This will be available on our YouTube page if you want to watch again or share the recording. And we will be back with you again next month in about 4 weeks. And we hope you'll join us then too. So thanks so much.
Thank you.